Waitress walked out on a billionaire's date. He followed her into the rain and confessed. Ethan Cross never waited for anyone. Time, to him, was a commodity even rarer than money, and both, in his world, were meant to be controlled. He ran Cross Global, a name that carried both admiration and fear in every boardroom on Wall Street. To the world, he was precision incarnate, tailored, unshakable, and ruthlessly efficient. His world had order, contracts, and silence. Love was a distraction. People were investments, and every investment had an exit strategy. That night he was seated at one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, where he was supposed to seal a merger and a marriage. Across from him sat Celeste Dalton, a woman sculpted by wealth. Her laughter sounded rehearsed, her perfume too sharp, her eyes scanning the room for better opportunities. They were not in love. They were simply merging empires. The only thing that caught Ethan's attention that evening was the waitress who approached their table. She moved quietly, but not timidly. There was something about her, a calmness that didn't fit the chaos of the city. Her name tag read Lena Hart. "Good evening, Mr. Cross," she said softly, setting down his glass of Merlot with steady hands. He looked up, expecting the usual flattery or nervousness that came with his name. Instead, she offered none. Just professionalism and something rare. Eye contact that didn't ask for anything. Celeste rolled her eyes as Lena refilled her glass. "You must be new," she said coolly. "You missed a spot on the fork." "I'll fix that immediately," Lena replied, her tone polite but firm. She took the fork, replaced it, and smiled faintly. "Thank you for noticing." It wasn't sarcasm, but there was dignity in her poise. Ethan noticed it. He noticed everything. The faint roughness on her fingers from extra shifts, the way her shoes had worn down unevenly, the small gold chain she wore under her collar, tarnished but precious. When she walked away, Celeste leaned in. "You shouldn't stare at the help, Ethan." He sipped his wine. "I wasn't," but he was. Hours later, after the dinner turned into another negotiation masked as romance, Celeste excused herself to take a call. Ethan stayed seated, his gaze drifting toward the bar where Lena was closing out her station. The restaurant had emptied, leaving only the soft hum of jazz and the rain beginning outside. He watched her stack glasses, move with rhythm, and for a reason he couldn't define, he stood up. When he reached the counter, she looked up, surprised. "Is there something you need, Mr. Cross?" He hesitated. No one ever made him hesitate. "Do you like working here?" She blinked. "That's not a question people like you usually ask." "People like me?" he echoed. "Rich, important, untouchable." He tilted his head. "And what are people like you?" "Replaceable," she said simply. The word hung between them. Ethan studied her, trying to remember the last time anyone had spoken to him without fear or flattery. He couldn't. "You don't seem replaceable," he said quietly. Her lips curved in a sad, knowing smile. "Everyone is, eventually." Celeste returned just then, her voice slicing through the air. "Ethan, we're leaving. The driver's waiting." He didn't move right away. For the first time in years, he didn't want to. When Lena turned away to finish her work, he felt something strange, the pull of curiosity, of gravity. He left a generous tip on the table, though he knew she'd never accept it. That should have been the end of it. But the next day, during a lunch meeting, he found himself distracted. He kept hearing her voice, calm, honest, unbent. He rescheduled 2 calls and cancelled dinner with Celeste without realizing why. By evening, he was back at the same restaurant. Lena noticed him the moment he walked in, though she pretended not to. Her co-worker nudged her. "That's Ethan Cross again. Did you mess up his order or something?" "I don't think so," she said, unsure herself. When she approached his table, he smiled faintly. "Twice in 2 days. You'll start thinking I'm following you." She arched an eyebrow. "Are you?" He considered the question. "Maybe." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that came from disbelief rather than humor. "You're serious?" "I don't do things halfway," he said simply. Her amusement faded. "Why are you here, Mr. Cross?" "Ethan," he corrected. "And I'm here because last night someone reminded me what sincerity looks like." "That sounds rehearsed," she said. He almost smiled. "That's because I'm out of practice." She hesitated, then said quietly, "I don't think I fit into your world." "Maybe that's the point," he said. Before she could reply, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Celeste had arrived, her voice sharp with anger. "Ethan, you cancelled on me and now I find you here. With her?" The restaurant went silent. Lena stepped back, embarrassed, but Ethan didn't flinch. "Celeste," he said evenly. This isn't about you." "Oh, isn't it?" she snapped. "You're humiliating me over some waitress." Lena's cheeks burned. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. He looked at her, really looked, and something in his eyes softened. "I think I do." Celeste stormed out, her heels echoing through the marble floor. The silence that followed was deafening. Lena turned away, trembling. "You shouldn't have done that. You just made everything worse." He stood slowly. "I don't care about appearances anymore." She shook her head, voice breaking. "That's easy for you to say. You have everything to lose. I have nothing." And with that she untied her apron, set it on the counter, and walked out into the rain. Ethan stood there, motionless, the world narrowing to the sound of the door closing behind her. For a man who had built his life on control, this was the first time he felt completely helpless. Then, without thinking, he followed her outside. The rain was cold, relentless, soaking through his clothes. She was halfway down the street, her figure small against the storm. "Lena!" he called out. She turned, startled. He was standing in the downpour, his hair plastered, his breath visible in the chill. "What are you doing?" she shouted. He took a step closer. "You were right," he said, his voice raw. "I've lived my whole life surrounded by people who pretend. You're the first person who didn't. Don't walk away from that." The rain poured harder, washing away everything that wasn't real. Lena looked at him, torn between disbelief and something deeper, the first flicker of compassion. "You don't even know me," she said. He shook his head, rain dripping from his lashes. "Then let me try." The world around them blurred, the lights, the noise, the rain, until there was only the space between them, heavy with everything neither dared to say. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Cross didn't want power or perfection. He just wanted her to stay. The rain softened from a roar to a hush, like the city was listening. Lena stared at this man who belonged to glass towers and guarded doors, this man who now stood drenched and unguarded in a puddle. For a second, she saw past the headlines, past the expensive watch ticking stubbornly in the storm. He looked young and tired and honest. "You can't mean this," she said, voice shaking. "Tomorrow, you'll go back to your office and decide none of it matters." He shook his head. "I've spent years deciding what matters before I felt it. It hasn't worked." Behind them, the restaurant door opened, light spilling onto the wet sidewalk. Mr. Delgado, the manager, hovered in the frame with the exasperated patience of someone who'd seen too much. "Lena," he called, voice low, pleading. "Come back inside, we can talk." She didn't move. Delgado glanced at Ethan, measuring risk like gratuity. "Mr. Cross," he said stiffly, "this is not appropriate." "It's human," Ethan replied. Delgado's jaw tightened. "Human doesn't pay a liquor license." He dropped his voice to Lena. "You're good, heart. Don't burn a future for a moment." A taxi hissed past. Somewhere a siren wound itself into the night, then faded, embarrassed by the rain. Lena wrapped her arms around herself, shivering now that the adrenaline had thinned. "I can't be a headline," she whispered. "I can't be someone's lesson." "Then let me be yours," Ethan said. "Let me learn from you." "Please," Delgado said, panic rising to peevishness. "If you're going to ruin your life, don't do it in my doorway." Lena blinked water from her lashes and forced a small, wet laugh. "I'm not ruining anything," she told him. "I'm leaving." She pulled the strap of her bag higher on her shoulder and stepped backward into the rain. "I'll return the uniform tomorrow." "Lena, wait," Ethan said. She took another step. "No," she said gently. "You don't get to follow me forever." He watched her go until the street swallowed her silhouette. The door closed behind him. Delgado sighed. "You realize Celeste Dalton funds half the owners' club," he said. "This isn't a diner. There are consequences." "I'm aware," Ethan said, and for the first time in a long time he sounded like a man aware of more than money. "How much does Lena make here?" Delgado bristled. "That's not—" "How much?" "Not enough," Delgado said, weary. "No one here does." Ethan nodded once as if he'd expected nothing else. Then he left, the rain tapering to pins of silver that pricked his cheeks awake. He didn't sleep. He paced his penthouse, a quiet museum of the life he'd curated for investors and interviews. Water traced the glass in steady lines. He thought of the way Lena had said replaceable, not angry, but resigned, like someone announcing the weather. He thought of Celeste's eyes, wide with disbelief that anyone might refuse the script. When morning arrived, New York wore the crisp, self-possessed light only the day after rain can stage. Ethan's phone lit with messages before his coffee machine could. His chief of staff, Jordan, had already triaged chaos. Celeste had left 3 blazing voicemails. A columnist had tweeted a blurry photo of Ethan in the rain. Cross has a heart developing. The board chair wanted him at 10 a.m. to discuss reputational drift. Jordan cued a call. 2 minutes until the board, she said, voice brisk, loyal, practical. I don't know what you did last night, but Celeste is saying you humiliated her publicly. Also, who is Lena Hart? He stared at the skyline. Someone honest. Jordan exhaled through her nose. Okay, that's both helpful and unusable. She paused. Ethan, if this is about your mother's anniversary, maybe sit tight. You tend to do something irrevocable this week every year. He closed his eyes. The anniversary had a way of souring everything he'd sweetened with routine. His mother had taught him kindness, then left too early for him to practice it. His father had taught him control, then stayed long enough to punish any attempt to loosen his grip. For a decade after the funeral, Ethan had framed his heart in rules. It had kept him safe, successful, and alone. Patch them in, he said. 4 faces pooled onto his wall screen, expensive disappointment in 4 angles. Ethan, said Strauss, the chair all varnish. Celeste called. She feels disregarded. I did disregard her, Ethan said. She deserved more honesty sooner. A CFO cleared his throat. You are trending, Ethan, not for innovation, for romantic anarchism. You cannot afford a scandal before the Shanghai vote, Strauss added. You will call Celeste and apologize, publicly. The Dalton Trust is a lever we cannot lose. Ethan looked at the white seam where sky met water and felt for once nothing tugging him in their direction. I'm not apologizing for being decent. You weren't decent, Strauss said with a paternal smile. You were impulsive. Maybe those are closer than we think. Silence stretched, then snapped. If you will not manage your personal life, we will, Strauss said. Sign the engagement agreement today, or we revisit your contract. Ethan felt the old familiar collar tighten around his throat. He had designed that collar himself, stitched it with terms that made him irreplaceable and leashed. He had never noticed the leash part. He did now. Revisit it, he said. We're done here. He ended the call, thumb hovering over regret like a man disarming a bomb and choosing for once not to. By noon, he was in a different neighborhood, the one where brownstones leaned tiredly against each other like old friends. He found the 3rd floor walk-up with the broken buzzer by guessing which stoop had plants that looked loved. He climbed. Lena opened the door in a faded sweatshirt, hair damp, eyes clear. She did not seem surprised to see him. You make a habit of ignoring boundaries, she said. I tried observing them, he said. It made me cruel. She leaned against the frame, assessing the man instead of the myth. You quit her, she said. The fiancé. Or she quit you. Both, he said. We quit the idea of each other. My manager texted, she said flatly. I'm suspended pending review. That's corporate for goodbye. I'm sorry. You don't need to be sorry. She hesitated. Just don't try to fix it with money. Then let me fix nothing, he said. Let me bring you coffee. She blinked. You brought coffee? He held up 2 paper cups from a cart that only locals revered. She stepped back to let him in. Her apartment was small and clean, the kind of place arranged around usefulness and a few stubbornly beautiful things. A chipped blue bowl on the counter, a watercolor of the river taped to the wall. A mug on the windowsill held grocery store daisies. Their stems leaned toward light. From the bedroom, a voice called, Lena, who is it? A woman in her 50s emerged, face lined with softness rather than worry. Oh, she said. It's the man from the headlines. Mrs. Khan, Lena said, embarrassed and fond all at once. He isn't, this is Ethan. I manage the cafe on the corner, Mrs. Khan told him, shaking his hand. Lena covers morning shifts when my husband's gout screams. She's the reason that bell rings at sunrise. She patted Lena's cheek, then turned to him. Are you here to cause trouble or to carry groceries? There is no third option. Groceries, he said, relieved to be useful. He followed her down 2 blocks, carrying bags up the stairs while Mrs. Khan narrated everything from the price of eggs to the temperature of mercy. People on the stoop watched them pass with the judgment of a neighborhood that earned its stories. Ethan felt for once like a man with hands instead of a brand with a calendar. Back inside, Lena stood by the window, watching rain resurrect itself in the gutter. He set the bags down and handed her the coffee. She took it, fingers brushing his, neither of them pretending that did nothing. Why are you really here? She asked finally. He swallowed. Because last night I saw myself, and I didn't like the angle. That's about you, she said softly. Where do I fit in? You're the angle that made the truth visible, she nearly smiled. poetry from a man who files SEC forms for sport. He didn't laugh. You looked at me and didn't ask for anything. It was disarming. That's because everyone already asks you for everything, she said. And because I don't want your life. He nodded. I don't either. From the counter, Mrs. Khan called, He will if you don't feed him. These men forget to eat once they start confessing. She pressed foil-wrapped parathas into his hands. You sit, both of you. They sat at the narrow table like fugitives from their circumstances. The food was warm and generous. Ethan hadn't realized hunger wasn't always about food. You'll lose things, Lena said after a while, tone practical, if you keep doing what you did on that call this morning. He looked at her. How do you know about the call? The internet, she said. Your board chair's nephew dates a busser at the restaurant. New York is a village. He rubbed his temples and laughed, surprised. Then yes, I'll lose things. Are you ready for that? No, he said. But I'm ready to stop being the man who chooses not to feel because it's cheaper. She considered him. I don't know what this is between us, she said. It's not a date, it's not rescue. She set the coffee down. But it doesn't have to be nothing. He felt those words land like a key, turning in a door he'd forgotten to try. Then, let it be a beginning, he said. A knock rattled the door. Lena stood, frowning. She opened it to find Celeste on the landing, dry in a white trench that said, Money is weatherproof. Her smile was as polite as litigation. Hello, Lena, she said. How you must be extraordinary. Ethan has never humiliated me in public before. Her gaze slid past Lena, found Ethan, and hardened by a degree. May we speak? Mrs. Khan materialized with the instinct of a woman who had seen too many men ruin too many afternoons. We do not do drama on my floor, she said. If you must fight, do it at the curb like civilized people. Celeste ignored her. Ethan, she said, you owe me an apology, and a statement refuting any implication that I was replaced. Lena flinched at the word. Ethan stood. I owe you honesty, he said. The apology is for not giving it sooner. You are a brand, Celeste hissed. You don't get to be human now. He looked at Lena, the corner of his mouth lifting as if he'd found the right word in a language he'd never learned. I'm learning anyway. Celeste's eyes cooled. You will regret this. She flicked a look at Lena, dismissive and cutting. And you, darling, this is not a fairy tale. He will tire of your sincerity once it stops trending. Lena held her gaze. Then it's a good thing I don't need him to trend. Celeste smiled, a small, sharp thing. We'll see who needs what when the headlines settle. She pivoted, her perfume holding the air after she disappeared down the stairs. Silence folded into the apartment like a tent. Mrs. Khan exhaled. Expensive tornado, she said, then patted Ethan's shoulder. Stay for dinner. It is harder for storms to find you when you are fed. Lena pressed her palms to the table, steadying herself. Ethan stayed very still. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For her? For all of this? She shook her head. Don't be. I don't want a promise. I want proof. What would proof look like? She looked out at the wet street where a boy biked through a puddle and laughed when it splashed his jeans. It looks like what you do when I'm not in the room, she said. How you treat the people who can't change your life. He absorbed that like a commandment. Her phone buzzed. Delgado, come by at 6. Owners want to talk. Another ping. Mariah from the night shift. A friend with a quick laugh and a rent problem. Careful. Dalton's PR is circling. They want a statement from you. The last buzz was a withheld number that made her skin go cold. We saw you. Enjoy the rain while it lasts. She said nothing, but Ethan saw her face change, just a little, the way clouds shift ahead of thunder. What is it? He asked. Consequences, she said, pocketing the phone. I should go see the owners, hear the verdict. I'll take you. You won't, she said, gentle and firm. Proof, remember? He nodded. Then I'll wait nearby. She almost smiled. You don't wait for anyone. I do now. She slipped into a navy coat that made her eyes look impossibly steady and tucked stray hair behind one ear. At the door, she paused. Ethan? Yes. Whatever happens in that meeting, she said, and the smallest tremor threaded her voice. Don't try to rescue me. Just be the man you say you're learning to be. The hallway smelled like old varnish and cardamom. She disappeared down the stairs. He listened to her steps fade, then to the city reclaiming its rhythm beyond the window. The hiss of tires on wet asphalt, the clatter of an impatient dog's nails on the stoop, a bus sighing as it knelt to let someone tired inside. Mrs. Khan folded an apron, watching him with an amused tenderness. Well, she said, Are you going to stand there, or are you going to help me chop onions like a person? He took the knife she offered. Like a person, he said, and the word felt radical and right. By the time the onions were sweating in the pan and the kitchen smelled like home, Lena's message arrived. They want me back, under conditions. Then a second line, slower, braver. Meet me in 20 at the corner. I need to decide who I am when it rains. The clouds returned before sunset, dragging a new kind of grey across the city. Lena stood at the corner under the awning of a deli, her phone clutched in one hand, trying to breathe through the weight of that message. They want me back and under conditions. Conditions meant ownership, control, a quiet way of saying, you'll keep your job, but not your dignity. She saw him before he saw her. Ethan standing across the street. No umbrella again, hair damp, hands in his pockets, like someone learning patience. For a moment, she wanted to turn and walk away, before the world turned this into another scandal. But when the light changed, he didn't cross. He waited for her to make the choice. She stepped off the curb first. You waited, she said. I said I would. You don't seem like a man who keeps his word for people like me. I didn't used to, he admitted, but I'm trying to be the man you told me to prove exists. The wind tugged at her coat. The owners want me back, she said, but they want me to sign a statement saying last night was a misunderstanding. His jaw tightened. Meaning you lied, that I didn't follow you, that nothing happened. Meaning I'm forgettable, she said quietly, that I imagined the only real thing I've felt in years. He took a step closer, eyes steady. Then don't sign it. And lose the only paycheck that keeps a roof over me. You can say that because your name pays for silence. Mine doesn't. He looked down, shame tightening his chest. Then I'll find a way to… Don't, she interrupted. If you pay for my voice, it's still not mine. Rain started again. Thin, uncertain drops that darkened the sidewalk like bruises. They stood there, the air between them thick with everything they couldn't say out loud. Come with me, he said finally. Where? Anywhere that isn't this corner. He led her to a small cafe tucked between two bookstores, the kind of place that smelled like roasted beans and rain-soaked paperbacks. It was nearly empty. They sat by the window, steam fogging the glass. You really don't care about the fallout, she said, studying him. Your investors, your name, your… I care, he said, but I'm realizing caring doesn't mean obeying anymore. She looked down at her hands, fingers wrapped around the coffee mug. You talk like someone who's discovering what it means to be alive. Maybe I am. Then you're late to the party. He smiled faintly. You've been there the whole time? No, she said. I've been working the party, picking up glasses when everyone else leaves. He leaned back, letting her words sink in. You shouldn't have to live like that. And yet I do. He was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that didn't demand an answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer. What if I told you I walked away from the company this morning? Her head snapped up. You what? I resigned as CEO. She blinked. You're joking. I'm not. He took a sip of coffee. They gave me an ultimatum. Sign the engagement contract or lose the board. I chose neither. She stared at him, disbelief mixing with admiration and fear. You really burned everything. I didn't burn it, he said. I just stopped feeding the fire. Do you have any idea what people will say? He smiled. They already say too much. Let them. Lena looked at him for a long time, then laughed quietly. Sad, genuine laughter that sounded like relief and disbelief all at once. You're insane. Maybe, but I finally feel something that isn't emptiness. She set the mug down, her voice trembling. You can't keep doing this, Ethan. You can't dismantle your whole life because of one night. It's not one night, he said. It's what that night showed me. And what's that? That I've been alive for 38 years and only started existing when someone dared to walk away. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. Don't make me your redemption story. You're not, he said softly. You're the reason I stopped needing one. She looked out the window, watching the city blur into light and movement. I'm still going back to the restaurant, she said. I need to face them. I know. You won't stop me? He shook his head. If I want to be different, I have to let you fight your own battles. She stood, pulling her coat tighter. Then wish me luck. He rose too, almost smiling. You don't need luck. Your truth in a world addicted to lies. Her breath caught, but she said nothing. She turned to leave and paused. Will you wait here? As long as it takes. She nodded once, then walked into the rain, her figure dissolving into silver mist. Ethan sat back down, watching the droplets trail down the glass. He didn't know if she would come back, But for the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to predict the ending. Inside the restaurant, Lena stood before her employers, Delgado, two silent investors, and Celeste Dalton herself. It felt like standing in a courtroom where everyone had already chosen the verdict. "Miss Hart," Delgado began, "this meeting is to determine whether your employment can continue without reputational damage to the establishment." Celeste crossed one elegant leg over the other, eyes cold. "We're offering you a chance to correct the narrative, dear. You sign a brief statement clarifying that Mr. Cross's behavior was misconstrued, an overreaction perhaps, and this whole matter disappears." Lena folded her arms. "You mean I disappear?" Celeste's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You're a waitress, not a martyr. You should know when to play your part. And you should know when to stop pretending the world owes you obedience," Lena replied quietly. Delgado's face paled. "Miss Hart," she continued, voice steady, "you've spent years serving people like her, Mr. Delgado. You should have learned by now that no tip is worth your soul." The room went silent. Celeste's expression turned to ice. "You'll regret that," she said. "You'll never work in this city again." "Then I'll build something in another one," Lena said. "Something that doesn't belong to you." She turned and walked out before anyone could stop her. Outside, the rain fell harder, drenching her hair, her clothes, but she didn't care. Every drop felt like baptism. Freedom hurt, but it was hers. At the cafe, Ethan was still there. He looked up the moment she entered, soaked, trembling, but radiant. "You didn't sign," he said. "I didn't," she whispered. "I couldn't." He exhaled, something close to pride softening his features. "Then you're braver than anyone I know." She sank into the seat across from him. "I don't know what happens now," he smiled. "Then we start with not knowing." For a moment, the world outside vanished. The noise, the chaos, the judgment, and there was only the sound of rain against glass and two people who, against every rule of their worlds, had finally chosen to stay. The next morning arrived like a bruise beneath the skyline, violet, slow, and heavy. Ethan hadn't gone home. He'd walked Lena back to her building and then lingered on the steps until dawn, watching the city remember how to breathe. The rain had washed the streets clean, but left everything glistening with consequences. Lena opened her window to the sound of vendors setting up carts and the faint hum of a distant saxophone. She hadn't slept much either. Her hands still trembled when she remembered Celeste's words. How easily someone like her could be erased by a signature, a sentence, a whisper. But she hadn't signed. She'd walked away, and for once walking away didn't feel like losing. Down on the corner, Ethan was waiting. Not in a car, not behind tinted glass, just standing there with two coffees, same as before. She smiled despite herself. "You don't get tired of waiting?" she asked as she reached him. "I'm new to it," he said, still learning. They walked without saying where they were going. New York in the early morning was softer, stripped of its arrogance. The city belonged for a few hours to people who worked for it instead of those who owned it. They passed street cleaners, bakers hauling trays, a mother coaxing her child into a cab. Ethan handed her one of the coffees. "I have to ask," he said, "what will you do now that you've quit?" "I didn't quit, they fired me," she said. "There's a difference." He nodded. "Still, you walked out with your head high. That's rare." "Rare doesn't pay rent," she replied, then softened. "But it does help you sleep." They turned into a small park where the pavement glistened from the rain. Pigeons pecked at crumbs under empty benches. Lena sat, sipping her coffee, looking at the mist rising from the ground. "You really gave it all up, didn't you?" she asked. "The company, the control." "I did," he said quietly. "They replaced me this morning. I saw the press release." She frowned. "How do you feel?" He thought for a moment. Relieved, angry, lost. Like someone who's been running a race without realizing the finish line moved years ago. Lena smiled faintly. "You sound human." "That's new for me," he said. "It's uncomfortable." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that said more than words could. Then her phone buzzed. A message from Mariah. "Celeste is talking to a reporter. She's making you sound like a gold digger." Lena's stomach twisted. "Of course she is," she murmured. Ethan looked at her. "What happened?" She showed him the screen. His jaw tightened. "She's doing this to protect her image. And to destroy mine," Lena said. "Because that's how people like her keep power. They make the truth sound cheap." He wanted to fix it. Every instinct in him screamed to call a lawyer, issue a statement, buy the narrative back. But she caught his expression and said, "Don't. If you fight her with money, she wins. That's her world. I won't live in it." He nodded slowly. Then what do we do? We wait, she said. Let them talk. I know who I am. He looked at her, admiration flickering like light through water. You know, Lena, most people spend their whole lives building reputations. You built a soul. She laughed softly. And what good is that when you still have to pay rent? I might have a solution, he said carefully. Not a handout. A partnership. She arched an eyebrow. That sounds like a rich man's version of help. Maybe, he admitted. But hear me out. I'm thinking of starting something new. A foundation, maybe. Something that teaches people like me how to actually listen to people like you. She studied him. You want to fix inequality with coffee and guilt? He smiled. No, I want to build something real. With you. Her heart skipped. Ethan, he stopped her. Not like that. I mean it. You understand people. I don't. You've spent your life serving them. I've spent mine studying them. Maybe together we can find a middle ground. Lena leaned back on the bench. You're serious? I am. She looked out across the park. You really believe money can be taught empathy? No, he said, but maybe people can. The simplicity of it made her silent. She turned to him, eyes softening. You're not the man I met in that restaurant. I'm not sure who I am yet, he said, but I know I want to learn beside you. For a moment their eyes met, and the world narrowed to that gaze. The warmth, the quiet, the fragile honesty of two people from opposite worlds, finding something neither could name. Then Lena's phone buzzed again. Another message. This time from a journalist she didn't know. We'd like your side of the story before running the piece tonight. Can you talk? She looked up at Ethan. They want a quote. Then give them one, he said. Your words deserve the light. Her fingers hovered over the screen. If I speak, I'll be dragged into their game. Not if you tell the truth, he said. You don't need to defend yourself. Just remind them who you are. She hesitated, then typed, I'm not a gold digger. I'm a worker who spoke to a man like he was human. That shouldn't be news. She hit send. Ethan smiled. That's better than any press release I've ever written. I wasn't trying to impress anyone, she said, just to stop pretending I don't exist. The rest of the day blurred into small, quiet hours. They walked, talked, laughed in pieces. For a moment, the city didn't feel so divided between penthouses and paychecks. By evening, her quote was everywhere. People shared it, argued about it, debated whether it was bravery or naivety. But somewhere between the noise, others saw what Ethan had seen, a woman who refused to be invisible. Late that night, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, scrolling through the flood of articles. Celeste's PR team had gone silent. Investors were panicking, and through it all he found one line that made him stop. Sometimes the truth doesn't come from those who own the world, but from those who've carried its weight. He closed his phone and smiled. Meanwhile, Lena sat by her window watching the city lights flicker. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Delgado. You're braver than I'll ever be. The staff is rooting for you. She smiled, tears filling her eyes. Somewhere in another part of the city, Ethan stood by his window too. Two silhouettes under the same sky, both realizing that maybe, just maybe, the rain had washed something clean enough for something new to grow. And as midnight passed quietly, both of them, two strangers turned mirrors, felt the faint, undeniable pull of something neither wealth nor poverty could measure, the beginning of love. Morning sunlight spilled through Lena's curtains like forgiveness she hadn't asked for. The city had already turned her story into a spectacle. Her face was on news blogs, her name attached to words like integrity and controversy. To some, she was a heroine. To others, a convenient symbol to argue over at breakfast. She turned off her phone. For the first time in days, she wanted silence, the kind that doesn't ask for opinion or proof. Downstairs, Mrs. Khan was arranging pastries in the cafe window when the bell chimed. Ethan walked in quietly, not in a suit this time, but in a soft grey sweater, sleeves rolled. He looked almost ordinary. Mrs. Khan didn't smile right away. You again, she said, though her tone lacked real irritation. If you break her heart, I'll feed you to the pigeons. He almost laughed. I believe you would. Good. Sit. She'll be down soon. Lena appeared a few minutes later, still half-tired, hair loosely tied back. You're early, she said. I didn't sleep, Ethan replied. Too many thoughts competing for space. About me. About us, he said simply. She sat opposite him, searching his face. You don't even know if there is an us. Then let me find out. Mrs. Khan placed 2 cups between them and drifted away, pretending to wipe counters while watching them through the reflection in the glass. Lena took a breath. You said you wanted to build something real. What does that mean? Ethan leaned forward, elbows on the table. It means I've spent half my life creating companies that made money but never meaning. You showed me what meaning looks like. I want to build a place that values people who've been ignored. Waitresses, clerks, janitors, people whose stories are never told. She tilted her head. You want to become a savior now? He shook his head. No, I want to become a student. Something in his tone made her soften. And you think I can teach you? I think you already have. Lena looked out the window. The street outside glimmered with late morning sun. If we do this, it can't be about guilt or romance. It has to be about purpose. Agreed. She smiled faintly. You're serious. I am, he said, and I'll fund it, but you'll run it. You'll decide who we help, how we do it. Lena hesitated. You'd hand that kind of power to someone like me. To someone like you, yes, because you actually deserve it. She wanted to believe him. The part of her that had been stepped on, talked over, dismissed. It wanted to trust that his words were more than apology wrapped in charm. But another part, the one that had learned the hard way how people use kindness as currency, warned her to stay grounded. Let's see if the world believes you mean it, she said. He smiled. Let's make them believe it. Over the next week, Ethan worked with her in the cafe's back corner, their table crowded with notebooks, scribbles, and mismatched mugs. Lena outlined programs for job training, small business mentorship, education grants. Ethan called in favors from friends who actually listened instead of lecturing. Every evening they walked the city streets, heads close together, dreaming out loud. But progress attracts storms. On the 6th day, while they were sketching the project's name on a napkin, the Heart Initiative, Ethan's phone lit up with an unknown number. He answered. Ethan Cross, came the voice of Strauss, cold and amused. Still pretending to be a philanthropist, I see. Ethan froze. What do you want? To remind you that rebellion has an expiration date, Strauss said. Celeste's father is suing for defamation. They claim your behavior damaged her public standing and the Dalton partnership. Our lawyers are naming the girl too, Lena Hart. She'll be buried in paperwork before she can spell redemption. Lena watched his expression shift. What is it? Ethan hung up slowly. They're suing. Both of us. She blinked. What? He rubbed a hand across his face. They're using the press fallout as evidence, calling it a calculated stunt. They're demanding a public apology and restitution. So, they want to buy our silence again, she said quietly. Yes. She leaned back, exhaling through clenched teeth. I told you they'd come for me. I won't let them. She shook her head. Ethan, you can't fight them like this. You already lost your company. If you go against them again, then I lose more, he said. So what? I already learned that wealth without conscience isn't worth keeping. Her eyes glistened. You'll lose everything that made you who you are. Maybe that's the point, he whispered. She reached across the table, fingers brushing his. You can't protect me from them, but you can stand beside me. He looked up at her then, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that the war they were walking into would test more than love. It would test truth itself. The lawsuit made headlines the next morning. Disgraced executive and waitress face legal battle after scandal. Commentators dissected every frame of their story, reducing two human beings to a morality play. But what struck people most wasn't the accusation. It was Lena's composure. She refused interviews, kept working at the cafe, and smiled like she had something none of them could touch. Reporters followed her one afternoon, cameras flashing as she left her shift. Ethan was waiting by the curb, holding out an umbrella. Walk with me, he said. They cut through the park, ignoring the shouts of questions behind them. They're calling this forbidden love, she said, like we're characters in someone else's movie. Maybe we are, he said, but we get to write the ending. She looked up at him through the rain. And what ending do you see? He stopped walking. The world around them faded into the sound of falling water. One where you're free, he said, and I finally deserve to stand next to you. Something in his voice made her chest tighten. She didn't respond, not with words, just with the silence that felt like truth. Back at her apartment, Mrs. Khan met them at the door. There's a man waiting upstairs, she said cautiously. A lawyer. Says he works for Mr. Dalton. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. Ethan's eyes hardened. Then let's hear what he has to say. The lawyer was young, polished and precise. He laid a single envelope on the table. Miss Hart, Mr. Cross, my client offers a settlement, $500,000 and a written apology retracting your statement. Sign it and this disappears. Lena didn't even touch the envelope. If we don't, then you'll spend years in court. the lawyer said coolly. "And your credibility will vanish long before the verdict." Ethan looked at her, waiting. This time he wouldn't decide for her. Lena stood. "Tell your client," she said evenly, "that my integrity isn't for sale. He can keep his money." The lawyer blinked, unprepared for that answer. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," she said, "but it'll be my mistake." He gathered the envelope and left without another word. When the door closed, Ethan exhaled slowly. "You just turned down $500,000. I turned down 500,000 lies," she said. "There's a difference." He smiled faintly, pride flickering behind exhaustion. "You realize they'll come harder now." "I know," she said, meeting his gaze, "but this time I won't be alone." Ethan stepped closer, just enough for her to feel his breath against her hair. "No," he murmured, "you won't." Outside, thunder rolled low over the skyline. A promise or a warning. Neither of them could tell. But for the first time, both felt something stronger than fear, conviction. And as the rain began again, it didn't sound like tragedy anymore. It sounded like two lives being rewritten from the ashes. Days turned into a quiet kind of defiance. Every morning, Lena went to the cafe as if nothing had changed, though now every cup she poured came with whispers from customers who pretended not to stare. She smiled through it all, not because she wanted to, but because she refused to give them her fear. Ethan spent those same mornings meeting with lawyers, not the ones who spoke in jargon and numbers, but a small firm recommended by Mrs. Khan's niece. They didn't work for corporations, they worked for people. For the first time, Ethan wasn't the man hiring a team to crush opposition. He was the one fighting to protect something fragile and true, but the pressure mounted fast. Strauss froze Ethan's remaining assets pending investigative review. His accounts were locked, his name blacklisted from every investment circle. Celeste's father's lawyers filed injunction after injunction, each designed to bury him in paper and exhaustion. Still, he didn't stop showing up at the cafe. Every evening, without fail, he'd sit by the window, waiting for Lena to finish her shift. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat, sharing silence that said more than any strategy ever could. One night, Lena walked out to find him standing on the corner, hands deep in his pockets, staring up at the grey sky. "You look like a man who's losing everything," she said softly. He turned to her. "I am, but I've never felt more alive." "Don't romanticize pain," she said. "It's not noble." He smiled faintly. "It's not, but it's honest." She stepped closer, searching his face. "You could still fix this. Apologize, play their game. Walk away from me and all of it disappears." "And walk back into the cage I built?" he said. "No, I'd rather lose everything than go back to being someone I despise." Her voice trembled. "You don't have to choose between me and survival." "Yes, I do," he said quietly, "because you're the only part of this that feels real." Before she could answer, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in a dark coat stepped out. Strauss. Even in the streetlight, his eyes gleamed with calculated disdain. "Mr. Cross," he said smoothly. "Miss Hart, I thought I'd find you here." Lena stiffened. "What do you want?" Strauss smiled. "To offer a final chance at sanity. The Daltons are preparing a criminal complaint. Defamation, interference, breach of confidentiality. It will ruin both of you." Ethan stepped forward. "You've already taken everything from me. What's left to threaten?" Strauss's smile didn't waver. "Your reputation is one thing. Hers is another. This woman has nothing, no resources, no protection. You could still shield her if you stop pretending you're her savior." Lena's hand clenched. "He's not my savior." "No," Strauss said, turning to her. "He's your downfall. You've let a man with power rewrite your story, and when this ends, you'll be nothing but a footnote in his scandal." Ethan's voice hardened. "Leave her out of this." Strauss looked at him like a father pitying a foolish son. "You can't save her, Ethan. You never could. Walk away now and I'll make this disappear. Stay and she pays the price." He turned and got back into the car. The door shut with the cold finality of a verdict. Lena and Ethan stood there, the streetlights flickering between them like judgment. "He's right," she said quietly. "No, he isn't. You don't understand what this will do to my life." "I do, and I'm not leaving." Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away. "Then I'll fight beside you, but not as your cause, Ethan. As your equal." He nodded. "Always." That night, they began drafting their defense. They met in Mrs. Khan's apartment. Papers spread across the dining table. Legal documents and half-drunk coffee scattered among plates of food she kept refilling. The older woman hovered in the kitchen, muttering about men who mistake cruelty for strategy. Ethan worked through the numbers while Lena read depositions and statements. Hours passed. The clock struck midnight, then 1, then 2. At some point, Lena leaned back and said, "Do you ever regret it? Not the company, the life before me." He looked up, weary but sincere. "Every day, but only because I see it clearly now." "What do you mean?" "I thought power made me free," he said, "but it only made me afraid. Afraid to lose, to feel, to care. You can't own the world when you're terrified of being human." She studied him for a long moment. "You've changed." He smiled faintly. "Ah, you did that." Lena turned her gaze back to the documents. "Then let's make sure it means something." They worked until dawn. When they finally stopped, Ethan walked her home. The streets were quiet, the sky bruised with the first light of morning. At her door, she turned to him. "If we lose this case, what then?" He hesitated. "Then we start over somewhere else. Together? If you'll have me." She looked at him, this man who had once embodied everything she distrusted, and saw something new in his eyes. Not pity, not pride, just love, quiet and unguarded. "I'll think about it," she said softly. He smiled. "That's fair." As she reached for the door, she paused. "Ethan?" "Yes?" "Promise me something. Anything. No matter what happens, don't hate them," she said. "People like Strauss, Celeste, the Daltons, they've spent their whole lives mistaking power for safety. That's their prison. Don't let it be yours." He nodded slowly. "I'll try." She gave a small smile and disappeared inside. Ethan walked home through the waking city. He passed a newsstand where their faces were splashed across the front page again, but this time the headline had shifted. The waitress who wouldn't break and the man who stood with her. He stopped, staring at it. For the first time in his life, Ethan Cross wasn't the headline. He was part of someone else's story, hers. And that, he realized, was exactly where he wanted to be. As he walked away, the city around him didn't look so cold anymore. It looked alive, and somewhere inside the noise and light, love was slowly learning how to survive. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and nerves. Cameras lined the back wall like vultures, waiting for the first drop of blood. Ethan and Lena sat side by side at the defense table, their hands inches apart, close enough to feel the warmth, but not the safety. This wasn't a corporate meeting or a staged press event. This was war dressed in law. Celeste sat across the room, flawless as ever, her white suit gleaming beneath the artificial light. Her father sat beside her, Arthur Dalton, a man whose presence could silence entire rooms. He looked at Ethan like a parent watching a disobedient child waste a dynasty. The air between them was dense with history and betrayal. When the judge entered, the room fell into the sterile hush of authority. Lena took a quiet breath. Ethan noticed her fingers trembling slightly. Without thinking, he covered her hand with his. She didn't pull away. That single, silent gesture was the only truth that mattered to either of them in that moment. The prosecution started strong. They painted Lena as an opportunist, a woman who used emotional manipulation to gain access to a vulnerable man of influence. They framed Ethan as reckless, unstable, a fallen mogul seeking moral redemption through a spectacle. Every word was designed to strip away dignity and humanity. Lena's attorney, a woman named Marisol Rivera, stood to speak. She was small, calm, with a voice that carried conviction instead of volume. "What you call manipulation," she said, "the world calls empathy. What you call scandal, we call courage. These two people didn't destroy anything. They exposed what power fears most, truth spoken without permission." Her words hung in the air like a cord waiting to resolve. Even the judge seemed to pause before moving on. During a recess, Ethan and Lena stepped outside. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions. "Lena, did you seduce Mr. Cross for money? Ethan, are you in love with her? Do you regret walking out on Celeste Dalton?" Lena kept walking, chin high. Ethan stayed close but let her lead. The rain started again, because somehow it always did when their truth needed cleansing. Under the courthouse awning, she finally exhaled. "They don't care about facts," she said quietly. "They care about the story." Ethan looked at her. "Then let's give them one worth remembering." Back inside, the afternoon dragged on with testimony after testimony. Strauss took the stand, his voice dripping with sanctimony. "Mr. Cross used to be a man of discipline and reason," he told the court, "until he met this woman and began acting irrationally. He jeopardized an empire for infatuation." Ethan's jaw clenched. His turn to speak came next. He stood, buttoned his jacket, a habit that no longer meant armor, and faced the courtroom. "Everything Mr. Strauss said is true," he began. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I did act irrationally. I did walk away from an empire, but not for infatuation, for clarity. I spent years thinking integrity was a luxury only the poor could afford. Then I met someone who lived it daily, with no safety net, no title, and no need for permission. He turned toward Lena. She didn't ruin me. She reminded me I was already broken. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was reverent. Celeste shifted in her seat, whispering something to her lawyer, but her mask cracked for a fraction of a second. It was enough. The session adjourned. As the crowd began to file out, a journalist shouted, "Mr. Cross, is it true you've lost everything?" Ethan stopped at the door. "Not everything," he said. "The most important things I'm just learning how to keep." That night, the media exploded. Clips of his testimony flooded every feed, dissected by pundits who suddenly found empathy marketable. Public opinion began to sway, not entirely in their favor, but enough to change the wind. Headlines softened. Cross speaks from the heart. Waitress refuses to bow. The love story corporate America can't control. In the cafe the next morning, the regulars greeted Lena differently. Some nodded respectfully. Others whispered, "That's her." It didn't matter. For once, she wasn't hiding. Mrs. Khan hugged her so tightly she nearly spilled the coffee pot. "They tried to make you a scandal," she said. "You became a sermon." Ethan arrived later, still tired but smiling. "You saw the news?" he asked. "I did," she said. "I also saw my rent notice. Fame doesn't pay the bills." He laughed. "Then maybe we should finally launch the initiative." She looked up. "You mean it?" "I filed the paperwork last night," he said. "The Heart Initiative is real. Her network for workers in hospitality. Legal advice, scholarships, protections, it's yours." Her eyes softened. "Ours," she corrected. The following weeks blurred into purpose. They met with donors, unions, local businesses. Ethan, stripped of his corporate polish, found himself learning how to listen to real stories, real pain. Lena, once anonymous, became a voice for those who had none. Together they built something neither power nor pity could corrupt. But with visibility came vulnerability. Anonymous threats began appearing in Lena's inbox. One message stood out among the rest. "You think you won, but the powerful always collect their debts." She didn't tell Ethan right away. He had enough battles. But one night, as they walked home after another long meeting, she noticed a car idling too long across the street. Headlights off, engine low, watching. Ethan noticed too. "Get inside," he said quietly. She froze. "It's nothing. Just a coincidence." "No," he said. "That's not coincidence, that's a warning." The car drove off slowly, tires whispering over the wet asphalt. Inside her apartment, Lena locked the door and leaned against it. "They're trying to scare us," she said. Ethan's eyes were dark but steady. "Then they underestimate how much we've already survived." She looked at him, really looked, and saw the exhaustion in his shoulders, the sleepless nights behind his calm. "You can still walk away," she whispered. "You don't owe me this fight." He stepped closer, his voice low, raw. "Maybe not, but I owe myself the chance to be the kind of man you believed I could be." The distance between them vanished. For a long moment, there were no words, only the fragile space where fear and love learned to coexist. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline, deep and distant, like applause from a storm that had been watching all along. Lena leaned her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm beneath. "You know this doesn't end neatly," she murmured. "I don't want neat," he said. "I want true." And as the city roared quietly beyond their window, Ethan and Lena stood together, two souls no longer defined by wealth or struggle, but by the simple, stubborn act of holding on. The morning after the car incident, the city felt colder, not because of the weather, but because fear changes the way you see light. Every corner, every reflection in a window seemed sharper. Lena walked to the cafe early, her steps brisk, her heart refusing to show its tremor. When she unlocked the door, she found Ethan already inside, sitting at a corner table with 2 coffees. He smiled, but his eyes gave away a sleepless night. "You should have called," she said softly. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, "and I didn't want you to start your morning alone." She set her bag down and exhaled. "You can't keep watching over me like this." "I know," he said, "but I need to know you're safe." Lena sat across from him, hands around her cup. "Safe doesn't exist, Ethan. Not for people who challenge the system." He studied her face, the calm defiance, the quiet dignity. "Then maybe we redefine safety," he said. "Maybe it's not about avoiding danger, but facing it without losing ourselves." Before she could reply, Mrs. Khan burst in, coat half-buttoned and face pale. "They're outside," she said breathlessly. "Who?" Lena asked. "The reporters. Dozens of them. They've been here since dawn. They know you both come every morning." Ethan stood immediately. Through the window, they saw flashes of cameras and the swarm of microphones pressing against the glass. Lena sighed. "They smell a new headline." Mrs. Khan crossed her arms. "Let them. The cafe isn't a courtroom. They can't twist what happens here unless you let them." Ethan glanced at Lena. "Do you want to speak to them?" She hesitated. "Part of me wants to tell them everything. The other part just wants to make coffee." He smiled faintly. "That's what I love about you." Her eyes flickered, caught off guard. "You shouldn't say that here. I don't care who hears it anymore." Before she could respond, the door opened, and a familiar figure stepped in. Marisol Rivera, their attorney. "We need to talk," she said. "The Daltons withdrew their defamation suit." Lena blinked. "They what?" Marisol nodded. "Officially, they're calling it a reassessment of public priorities. Unofficially, Celeste's team couldn't handle the public sympathy you've gained. You won." Mrs. Khan let out a small cry of joy. Ethan closed his eyes, a long breath leaving him like release. But Lena didn't celebrate. "It doesn't feel like winning," she said quietly. Marisol smiled gently. "That's because this wasn't about victory. It was about surviving." She placed a file on the table. "One last thing. The Heart Initiative has been approved as a non-profit. You're both listed as co-founders." Lena opened the folder, scanning the paperwork. Her name printed beside his. It didn't feel like luck. It felt like justice trying to bloom in difficult soil. Ethan watched her, pride softening his usually sharp gaze. "We did it." She nodded slowly. "No. You listened. That's rarer." The cafe door opened again, this time without the chaos of cameras. A young waitress in her early 20s approached shyly. "Are you Lena Hart?" Lena smiled. "Depends who's asking." I just wanted to say thank you," the girl stammered. "My boss saw your interviews. He doubled our pay this week. Said it was because people like you remind him that decency still matters." Lena's eyes filled. She reached out, touching the girl's hand. "Don't thank me. Just keep standing up for yourself even when no one's watching." The girl nodded and left. The moment hung in the air, quiet and sacred. Mrs. Khan wiped a tear discreetly. "You see? You've already changed something." But change, as they both knew, doesn't come without its ghosts. That evening, as Ethan walked Lena home, he received a call from a private number. He hesitated, then answered. A familiar voice spoke on the other end, Arthur Dalton. "You think you've won, Ethan, but the system you've spent your life feeding doesn't forgive apostates. Be careful which lights you step into. Some of them burn." Ethan said nothing. He hung up and slid the phone into his pocket, the chill of the threat sinking deeper than the night air. Lena noticed. "Who was it?" "No one worth remembering," he said. She stopped walking. "Don't protect me by hiding the truth." He looked at her. "It was Dalton. He warned me." Her jaw tightened. "Let him threaten. We've faced worse." He smiled faintly. "You make bravery sound easy." "It isn't," she said. "It's just the only thing left when running stops working." They reached her building. For a moment, neither moved. The streetlight flickered between them, catching the glimmer of rain on her hair, the shadow beneath his eyes. "Come inside," she said. "You need rest." "I can't," he said softly. "Not yet. There's something I need to finish." "Ethan," he touched her hand gently. "You once told me proof is what matters. Tomorrow, you'll have it." She frowned. "What do you mean?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sleep. I'll see you in the morning." And then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the fog-draped streets before she could stop him. That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She replayed his words, his tone, the strange calm in his face. Somewhere deep down, she knew he was about to do something irreversible. At dawn, the city woke to headlines once again. Ethan Cross donates remaining fortune to the Heart Initiative. The amount was staggering. Every remaining cent transferred overnight into the non-profit account. He'd made himself penniless, erasing the last trace of his empire. When Lena saw it, her breath caught. The world was calling him reckless again. The media called it a grand gesture, but she knew better. It wasn't a gesture. It was freedom. And for the first time, the man who had once owned everything had given it all away, not to prove love, not to seek redemption, but to finally be the person she had believed he could become. But as the morning light rose, he was nowhere to be found. His phone went straight to voicemail. His penthouse was empty. Lena stood by the window of her cafe, staring out at the rain-soaked city. heart pounding with both pride and fear. Because she knew Ethan Cross had done the one thing he'd never learned how to do: disappear for the right reasons. The news spread faster than truth ever could. Every network, every site, every whispering headline carried his name again. Billionaire vanishes after donating entire fortune. But this time there was no scandal attached, just confusion, awe, and a kind of reverent disbelief that made people talk in softer voices. Lena didn't care about the noise. She only cared that Ethan was gone. For hours, she tried every number, every contact. She called Marisol, who hadn't heard from him. She checked the Foundation's account. His transfer was real, complete, irreversible. He had emptied everything he owned into the cause they'd built together, then vanished before the world could call it charity. By evening, exhaustion hit her like gravity. She sat in the empty cafe, staring at the steam curling from her untouched cup. Mrs. Khan moved quietly behind the counter, pretending to clean but really just keeping watch. Maybe he just needed air, Mrs. Khan said finally. Lena shook her head. Ethan doesn't disappear for air. He disappears when he's afraid to hurt someone. Mrs. Khan came closer, her voice kind. Then maybe you have to find him before he forgets how to come back. Lena closed her eyes. But where do I start? The bell above the door rang softly. A courier stepped in, holding a sealed envelope. For Miss Hart, he said, setting it on the counter. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single page. Ethan's handwriting, familiar and careful. Lena, you once said proof is what matters. This is mine. The money, the company, the noise, it was never real. You were. You made me see that love isn't a transaction. It's surrender. And I needed to surrender everything before I could deserve you. Don't look for me. Not yet. I need to learn how to live without power before I can stand beside you as an equal. When the world stops talking about us, I'll find you again. Ethan. The paper slipped from her fingers, landing softly on the table. Mrs. Khan read the letter, then placed a hand on her shoulder. He's trying to become what you saw in him. I didn't ask him to disappear, Lena whispered. I just wanted him to be human. Sometimes, Mrs. Khan said, being human means stepping into silence. Days passed, then weeks. The Heart Initiative grew faster than either of them had imagined. Lena worked tirelessly, organizing grants, meeting with donors, speaking at small gatherings where waitresses, bus drivers, janitors shared their stories. She spoke with grace, humility, and fire. Every time she stood at a podium, she carried Ethan's absence like a secret vow. And then one evening, while hosting a community event in Brooklyn, something happened. A man stood at the back of the hall, partially hidden by the dim light near the door. He wore a simple coat, his posture familiar in a way that made her heart stutter. When she finished her speech, the audience applauded, but her eyes never left the shadowed figure. When the room emptied, she walked toward him, heart pounding. Ethan, she said softly. He stepped forward, older somehow. His beard was slightly grown, his eyes different, calmer, clearer. You found me, he said. You left me, she replied. I had to, he said. I needed to know who I was, without you fixing me. She looked at him, torn between anger and relief. And did you? He nodded slowly. I lived in a small town upstate, worked at a hardware store. No one knew my name. No one cared what I used to be. I learned how to sweep floors without a board meeting to justify it. I learned that time feels different when it belongs to you. Her throat tightened. You could have told me. I couldn't, he said. If I called, I'd have run back. And I needed to stay gone long enough to deserve coming back. She stared at him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. You're still terrible at timing. He laughed softly. You always said I'd learn slow. They stood there, the air between them thick with everything unspoken. Loneliness, pride, forgiveness. Finally, she said, the Foundation's thriving, you should see it. It's changing lives. He smiled. I have seen it. I've followed quietly. You made it everything we dreamed. We, she echoed. It was always we. He looked down, humility softening every word. If you'll have me again, I'd like to come home. Not as a man trying to save you, but as one who learned how to save himself. Tears filled her eyes. You already are home, she said. For the first time in months, he stepped closer. She reached out, fingers tracing the lines of his face. The reality of him. You really did it, she whispered. You let go. He nodded. And somehow, I found more than I lost. The streetlights outside glowed through the window, painting them in golden warmth. The noise of the city drifted in faintly, a bus passing, laughter from a nearby bar, life carrying on. He took her hand. "I kept one thing," he said quietly. "A letter you wrote me once, back when I didn't know how to listen." "I never wrote you a letter," she said. He smiled. "Not on paper, in words, in the way you looked at me that night in the rain. It said, 'Be better, not for me, for yourself.'" Lena blinked back tears. "And are you?" "I'm trying," he said. She took a deep breath, then pulled him into a quiet embrace. His arms wrapped around her, steady, certain. For the first time they fit, not as opposites trying to merge, but as equals finally standing still. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft, forgiving, familiar, and in that fragile golden silence, the city that had once judged them both seemed to exhale, as if acknowledging that somehow, against every rule, every class, every expectation, love had found a way to endure. The rain that night didn't sound like sorrow anymore. It sounded like rhythm, soft, patient, eternal. The city had quieted into its rarest hour, when everything slows enough for truth to be heard. Inside the empty community hall, Ethan and Lena stood close, the echo of applause from earlier fading into something deeper, peace. They hadn't spoken for minutes. They didn't need to. Some reunions are louder in silence. Lena was the first to move. She pulled away just enough to look at him, her eyes tracing the man who had once been untouchable. His suit was gone, his watch replaced by a small scar on his wrist, his posture softer. He didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like someone who had learned to breathe. "You know," she said gently, "when I read the headlines that you were gone, I thought I'd lost you forever." Ethan's voice was low. "You did lose me, but only the version of me that didn't deserve you." She smiled faintly. "I wasn't looking for someone to deserve me, Ethan. I just wanted someone brave enough to see me." He stepped closer. "I see you now, not as a story, not as a savior, just as you." Outside, the wind pushed droplets against the glass. The sound was soft, almost like applause from the night itself. Lena reached for his hand. "So what now?" "Now?" he repeated, thinking. "Now we live quietly. We build, we give, we grow old, knowing we didn't waste the chance to be real." She chuckled softly. "That's not much of a fairy tale." "It's better," he said. "It's true." The following months unfolded like pages written in light. The Heart Initiative expanded. Branches opened in other cities. Scholarships were funded for single mothers, and workers who had been invisible for years found a voice. Lena became a name people respected not for scandal, but for sincerity. Ethan worked behind the scenes, managing logistics, teaching financial literacy to those who'd never trusted money. He stopped being a figurehead and became something rarer, useful. Their love didn't explode like it did in stories. It settled, it matured, it breathed. Some evenings after the day's noise faded, they'd walk through the park that had once held their first real conversation. The same pigeons, the same worn benches, the same city that had watched them fall apart and rebuild. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Lena said, "Do you ever miss it?" He looked at her. "What?" "The power, the boardrooms, the way people used to look at you." He smiled softly. "Sometimes. But then I look at you and I remember what they never saw. That the world is louder at the top, but it's never kinder." She squeezed his hand. "You turned power into compassion. Not many men do that." He looked down. "You taught me that love without humility isn't love. It's control." They stopped walking. The sunset painted her face in gold, and for a moment he just watched her, memorizing the quiet strength that had changed his life. "Lena," he said. "Yes." "If I hadn't met you that night, if you hadn't walked away into the rain," she smiled, "you'd still be sitting in a restaurant pretending you were happy." He laughed softly. "And you?" "I'd still be hiding in the back room, pretending I didn't matter." They stood there, two people who had stopped pretending, watching the world shift colors around them. When the first drops of rain began to fall, neither moved. Ethan tilted his face upward, eyes closed. "Seems it always rains when we find ourselves." Lena stepped closer, her voice warm and steady. "Maybe it's not rain. Maybe it's the world washing away what we're not meant to keep." He looked at her then, the same way he had that first night, when the world was sharp and uncertain, when everything about her had felt like truth dressed in courage. This time, though, he didn't hesitate. He reached for her, and when their lips met, it wasn't fire or frenzy. It was calm, the kind of calm that only comes after surviving every storm together. When they pulled apart, he whispered, "Do you still believe love like this can last?" She smiled. It already has. Years later, when their story became a quiet legend, told in the corners of cafes and whispered by those who still believed in decency, no one agreed on the details. Some said he gave up his fortune for guilt. Others said she saved him. But those who truly understood, the ones who'd lost something to gain themselves, knew the truth. It wasn't about wealth or scandal or redemption. It was about two souls who met on opposite sides of power, looked through the armor, and recognized something divine. That love beyond money isn't about what you give or lose. It's about who you become when there's nothing left to hide. And as the rain fell one last time on their favorite bench, Ethan Cross and Lena Hart sat together, hands intertwined, hearts at peace. No audience, no noise, just the sound of a city finally quiet enough to hear them breathe.